welcome here our first guest of the day. Yeah, here you are, dear one. Hmm. So, dear friends, fellow seekers, kin to nature and mystery, it is with a heart full of inspiration and admiration and reverie, really, that I'm introducing you to this visionary guide, visionary soul guide, Salmon King, also Brian Stafford in other worlds. Um, yeah, he is one who is serving life with so much devotion, so much action, talking about action, so much action. He is a soul initiation guide within Animas Valley Institute, as well as he is the coordinator of the Wild Mind program in Animas Valley Institute. Uh, he is spreading this work around the world. I think you reached, or this work reached all the continents in this world. Yeah. So imagine this work of rewilding the human psyche and rewilding communities towards ecological transformation in all the countries, and he has a lot to do with that. Thank you so much for being here. You are one of many facets and many flavors. You're fierce, you're kind, you're joyous, you are unexpectedly, trickstery, poetically, uh, killingly seducing us into the depths. Thank you so much for your presence here,
You're
Brian.
welcome. It's an honor to be with all of you this morning. It's early here in Southern California where I am. I can just hear the birds beginning to sing, and the squirrels are not out yet. The crows aren't quite yet here. And here I am with all of you. So it's an honor to be here with you. Um, yeah, the title of my presentation is Pathways to Ecological Awakening and Ecological Consciousness, Finding Our Way Home and into the Future. And it's something that I've stumbled into by going on this journey, that this is maybe something I've been researching my entire life without really knowing it until later, and like, oh, that's what I've been doing. So it's an honor to kind of present something important here. And I've been in the wild for the past 6 days, so I haven't been able to attend any of the talks that's come before. So if I repeat something, I apologize. Hopefully you'll find something new here. And of course, I'm quite indebted to certain people here, especially Bill Plotkin and Janine Marie Haugen, but also to Thomas Berry, Joanna Macy, friends in ecotherapy and ecopsychology and deep ecology, and indigenous thought leaders like Tyson Yunkaporta, Gregory Cajete, Melissa Nelson, Robin Wall Kimmerer, and even my mentors in the psychedelic realm. And I'll be talking about nature, psychedelics, consciousness here. And of course, just feeling our gratitude and indebtedness and commitment to this earth, to this planet that we live on, that supports us, sustains us, feeds us. I wonder if we might just take a moment here and just drop in. Just close your eyes. I know you've been kind of in a meditative state, but just close in. I invite you to just drop into a place, and maybe a place of memory where you feel really alive in the wild or the semi-wild. And you might just allow whatever is the first thing that comes to be there, and to remember what it was like, the quality of light there, and the colors, and the breeze, and the aroma of the place, even the taste in your mouth, and the temperature. And of course, the land forms, the water forms, the sky forms, plant forms, the three-dimensionality of that place and all its beings. Also just feeling like what it was like to be in your body in that place on the body of Earth, like the vibe of the place and any emotions that are there as well as you remember this place of being fully alive. And just be open to any emotion that might be there. Sometimes when I go back in my mind, my memory, my imagination to these places, I'm filled with joy and often nostalgia and sometimes grief, especially if some of them have been desecrated. So just be open to whatever emotions there. And yeah, so I wanted to bring us back to Earth since most of us are not sitting outside right now on the Earth. We're probably in a room or here we're on video, just to be back in our senses and back in our bodies here. There's a journey I'm going to speak about that's a really important part of the journey. It's one of the earlier parts of the journey of soul initiation, almost a prerequisite, you might say. And I'll just share a personal story from my own journey. See now, 12, 13 years ago now, I was on the edge of a Utah canyon and I descended. And I wanted to know, if I was so successful, why did I feel so worried about the world? Like, so worried about the world. Like, what I was doing, even though I loved it, wasn't the main thing I was here to do. I would have surprised my colleagues and my wife at the time. And one of the things I was doing down in that canyon was a solo fast for 24 hours. And in this area, it was a place where indigenous people had lived for thousands of years, but not for the past 800 years. And one of the things I was grieving was not a real relationship with grandparents. My grandmother on my mother's side had died when I was one. My grandfather on that side didn't really like children. And my grandparents on the maternal side, they had 15 kids and like 60 grandkids. So you were just a number. And my parents were very interested in me behaving properly. And I was grieving the fact that I didn't have an adult who just delighted in who I was. So I decided to ask this juniper tree in the bottom of this canyon if he could be my grandfather for a day. And I sat in his lap and just told him about my longing to just be loved for who I was. I did some other interesting things that day. There was a kiva down there, a ceremonial space where the indigenous people had been there, kind of fallen into ruins. And I wondered about what their lives must have been. And that night, I went to bed, climbed out of the grandfather, laid underneath him. And in the middle of the night, I woke up because there was someone in my space. There was an indigenous woman there. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me. I looked at her. I didn't really understand what was happening. By training, I was a psychiatrist. I wondered if I was having an hallucination or a vision, but I wasn't really sure because I was in that kind of mystical space in the wild. And then she looked at me with soft eyes and smiled. She said, "Welcome home." And I burst into tears. I burst into tears because I realized I'd kind of left home for maybe 40 years. I was always one who loved nature. Of all the people in college and medical school and in my training, on the weekends, I was always the one outside hiking or recreating. But there was something that happened here. It was a different kind of shift. I knew that it would probably change everything. I became more emotional about what was happening to the Earth's life systems, became more committed to action. It wasn't just a thought anymore that something was wrong and needed to be done. So I'm going to be talking about consciousness shifting. And as you can hear in that story, my consciousness was radically shifted by an expansion and a return to a kind of ecological consciousness by meeting Grandmother Earth, who welcomed me back home. And it made me feel no longer like I was an orphan in the world and more kin with all beings. The Canadian David Suzuki says, the way we see the world shapes the way we treat it. If a mountain is a deity, not a pile of ore, if a forest is a sacred grove, not timber, if other species are biological kin, not resources, or if the planet is our mother, not an opportunity, then we will treat each other with greater respect. Thus is the challenge to look at the world from a different perspective. So where I'd like to wander in with us today is to kind of define some particular terms here and describe what it's like to live from ecological consciousness or egocentric and anthropocentric consciousness. Share briefly how I sense we lost our ecocentric consciousness, how we might return and retain ecocentric consciousness for our children and for ourselves, and then describe this experience that I've shared briefly here of ecological awakening, a particular moment that is transformative for many individuals who've been privileged to experience it. And then I'll share some of the tips of how I guide ecological awakening in my practices. Many indigenous peoples, and the ones that are still intact here, know that this kinship is kind of fundamental to our being in the world. In the state of Florida here, we call it, and Seminole people still live there. This is how the begin of their major myths. So this is how the beginning was made. Some call it the creation. Though there were many, many animals put on this earth by the Creator, all came to know their proper places on earth. Echoing that, but maybe from several thousand years and several hundred generations later, David White puts this question into the world. Sometimes I look out at everything growing so wild and faithfully beneath the sky and wonder, why are we, the one terrible part of creation, privileged to refuse our flowering? I think we've all sensed that something's wrong with the world right now, and it's primarily the way the humans inhabit the world. My suspicion, as you've heard from some of the other speakers, especially Bill Plotkin, that there's something about our impaired human development because of the societies we're currently living in here. Robin Wall Kimmerer asks the question this way: is land merely a source of belongings, or is it the source of our most profound sense of belonging? So one of the things, and I've been kind of intently researching this over the past, well, probably since the pandemic, 4 or 5 years, something like that. And I'll just summarize where I'm going to head. Humans are actually born into their innate consciousness, which is ecocentric consciousness. And over time, so-called evolution and human development, humans who left hunter-gatherer and indigenous nature-based communities began to lose their ecocentric consciousness. They developed other skills, knowledge, perspectives, but they often lost this consciousness. And the societal practices, rituals, and rites almost became focused solely on society rather than the balance between nature and culture. And this lopsided development has led to dire consequences for human development and the survival of our species, and nearly now every other species. And our current westernized parenting, educational, religious practices continue to support this egocentric and this anthropocentric worldview. Practices that protect our belonging to Earth protect each child against the loss of this consciousness. And for those beyond adolescence, there are practices by which we can eco-awaken again. And for myself, I think this is the most important psychospiritual and consciousness shift required in the world right now to kind of correct our biocidal course. Another way to say it from the eco-philosopher Gregory Bateson: the major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way people think. Right? Here's an example of a kind of ecocentric consciousness statement. This comes from the deep ecologist John Seed on the continent and country of Australia. I am the rainforest, recently emerged into consciousness, defending myself. And so consciousness, let's just describe that term here, because like many terms probably here over the weekend, there are many different definitions. I'm using consciousness as our inner fields of awareness, including the totality of our perceptions, our thoughts, emotions, somatics, memories, and images, and what we observe, experience, and recall on a vast continuum between unconsciousness and dreamless sleep and being fully awake. Another way to say it is what we notice going on within us and where we might act from. And it's so much more than cognition or thought, so much more than knowledge or intellect, so much more than that. So the second part of the definition here is I'm going to use the word centric. Centric, right? Most of us have heard and probably used or even been accused of being egocentric. Raise your hands if you've known someone who's egocentric. Raise your hands if sometimes you've acted that like it was all about you. Right. Yeah, we know what that's like, and we drift in and out of that sometimes. And I'm using it here as a generalization for the primary place culture, our society acts it, and that many individuals do, because that's the way we're reared. Right? Centric is an adjective combining meaning having at its center, centric. So what do we put at the center of our consciousness, or rather, what is the center of our consciousness? If we're primarily thinking about the human, that's an anthropocentric consciousness. If it's the individual, it's egocentric consciousness. And if we're putting all the biological beings in the entire non-living system of Earth at the center, that's an ecocentric consciousness. Those are very different ways of perceiving and participating in the world, right? If we live as the individual, you get American politics. It's pretty terrifying, egocentric consciousness. And I'd say for hundreds of years, we've probably been living with the anthropocentric consciousness. That's what's primarily important for society, religion, entertainment, science, theology, is the human. It's not the earth. It's not the ecosphere, right? So an egocentric consciousness denotes a consciousness, an individual or collective consciousness, where the individual's primary concern is really just themselves rather than society or the ecosphere. It's obviously very limited because it has only to deal with one's own activities and needs. The human self, the individual self, is head at the center. An anthropocentric consciousness defines a consciousness that considers human beings as the most significant entity of the universe. Well, that's a pretty big arrogance, actually, here, but probably one that most of us have been entrained in our societies here. And most everything then is experienced, interpreted, and participated in and from a sense of human values and experiences. And often this boils down to economics in the world, of what supports human economics rather than the ecosystem. Ecocentric consciousness, again, is the consciousness that holds the entire ecosphere as well as the local ecosystem at the center of consciousness. When we live from this ego-anthropocentric consciousness, we end up with this world that we have right now, the westernized, modern, and postmodern world, where individuals are very disconnected from ecological consciousness and disconnected from their greatest sense of belonging. And they struggle and they put an emphasis on belonging to social groups, including social media. And we know how that goes, right? They're often also disconnected from their own wildness, their wild self, their instincts, their capacities, and their ability to choose and adapt to an environment by taking other adaptive strategies here. Often, people in these types of societies are disconnected from their bodies, their emotions, and their ability to be present in their senses and in their imagination. And sadly, they cannot mature to become healthy psychospiritual adults, which means we end up with these patho-adolescent societies or an ego anthropocentric society, or an adolescent ecocentric culture, which I'll talk about. But we rarely see these kinds of societies in the world right now. It's rare to find a country, a region that wants to live in an ecocentric society. There are several, but very few. And what we're hoping here with the Animas Valley Institute, that one day, maybe 7 generations forward, we might live in an ecocentric society that's on its way to becoming a soul-centric culture. Yeah. Let's see how I'm doing here on time. Okay. I'll just name what's probably obvious. When we're living in an adolescent ego anthropocentric culture, things feel unnatural and unbalanced and leads to lots of cultural pathologies such as materialism, greed, competitiveness just for the sake of hostility, violence, racist, sexist, ageist, and ultimately self-destructive. Bill Plotkin says this: in current Western and Westernized societies, in addition to the scarcity of true maturity, many people of adult age suffer from a variety of adolescent psychopathologies, including incapacitating social insecurity, identity confusion, low self-esteem, few or no social skills, narcissism, relentless greed, arrested moral development, recurrent physical violence, materialistic obsessions, little or no capacity for intimacy or empathy, substance addictions, and emotional numbness. Well, I'd say that probably groks it for about 20% of the planet who suffer from these kinds of maladies because of the type of societies that we live in and some of the things that happen or don't actually happen as we mature in these societies here. Right? They also see the earth, these societies see the earth as inanimate and as a resource. It also leads to the negation of rights for other life forms and the denial of the sentience of the earth. And this type of consciousness eventually leads, perhaps obviously, to the pollution of the air, the water, the ground, and the devastation of ecosystems, biodiversity, and this climate catastrophe that is facing us right now. I would say also these consciousness permeates other kind of worldviews that we have. So one worldview we have is like, well, how do we perceive and participate in the world? And often I would say that corporations and science and marketing portray the world as what Joanna Macy calls this techno-industrial growth society as mechanomorphic. It's all a machine, and the universe is a machine, and Earth is inert. Life is random chemistry. Everything is determined, and there's lineal causality. Versus if you're raised in an eco or soul-centric society, you might see the Earth as organismic, Gaia. The universe is an evolving process or story. Life is autopoiesis. There's indeterminacy and yet probability. There's nonlinear dynamics, and that something is happening here that's moving toward a sacred wholeness. There's emergence in all part of systems here. Also, when we're living in ego or anthropocentric consciousness, we've seen this in colonialism as the conquest of nature, dominion and control, heroic individualism, exploitation and management. Nature has no instrumental value, whereas ecocentric consciousness, and this is maybe the thing to hone in on, is that we're living as part of nature and everything is experienced as kin, coevolution and symbiosis. And the way of living in the world is stewardship, restoration, regenerativity, and rewilding or giving nature wild spaces. Nature here has intrinsic value. It's also pervaded our theologies, we might say. In the major monotheisms, I was raised evangelical Christian. Nature's kind of background, often seen as demonic and dangerous as well. And not that the divinity is transcendent, it's beyond the earth, and the creation is fallen, which can lead to either monotheism or a backlash of what we might call atheism here. Whereas in ecocentric cultures, we're kin with all beings, and that leads toward an animistic kind of consciousness, the sentience of everything and this, the fact that nature is sacred. It's not a belief system, it's an experience of the world. That's a big difference. And that there's immanent divinity in all beings. It's a creation spirituality, to use Matthew Fox's terms. And things can be seen in a polytheistic or panentheism. Those are different worlds, right? Simply put, living in an ecocentric consciousness, we often experience the world and ourselves as segmented, disconnected, desacralized, inert, numb, dead, objective, versus an interconnected, sacred, animistic, subjective world of participation. Well, I'm choosing the latter. I hope that you, from my descriptions here, would also want to choose the latter. And maybe some of you are living in it, and we all want to live more in it. And I just want to share briefly of how I understand we might have got lost in this, how our species got lost, right? John Trudell, who's an American indigenous, Santee Dakota American, says, all humans are descendants of tribal people who were spiritually alive, intimately in love with the natural world. Children of Mother Earth, when we were tribal people, we knew who we were, we knew what we were, and we knew our purpose, right? The sacred perception of reality remains alive and well in our genetic memory. We carry it alive and well within our genetic memory. We carry it inside of us, usually in a dusty box in the mind's attic, but it is accessible. And my understanding is that over the course of human evolution, for hundreds of thousands of years, we lived primarily in hunter-gatherer modes of agriculture and living. During that time, we were egocentric, but as we progressed in our tools, our specialization to horticulturalists, to agriculturalists, to industrialists, and now to technologists, each of those advancements, so to speak, led to a loss of ecocentric consciousness. And my sense right now is that by the time someone is 18 years old, there's probably only 5% of individuals who live primarily in an ecocentric consciousness, whereas 95% primarily live in an egocentric and an anthropocentric consciousness. And that's a huge problem, obviously. Huge problem here. Well, how did this happen? Was it all of a sudden, or was it gradual? I've hinted that it was gradual. My colleague, John Lynch, who teaches at the Northern Arizona University, when he's teaching his students, he says, well, it's kind of like if you had a compass, but it was off by 1 degree, and then you walked for 10,000 years, how lost you might be. It might be very slight at the beginning, but over time, you get really lost. And I think that's a great kind of metaphor for where we found ourselves today. Right? So here's some principles about kind of how we return. And I mentioned this at the beginning. In a healthy nature-based cultures, we never lose our ecocentrism. We're born in ecocentrism. We know that we belong as much as any other thing does. I remember when I was taking my twin children out for hikes, little wanders when they were 3 and 4 years old, of how you could just sense that they knew that they belonged here and they delighted in the world. They'd speak to little things as if everything was their friend. It was lovely to watch. In a healthy culture, we only mature further into our ecocentrism, and we experience our earth as the primary place of belonging more and more because it's the way it is, and it's in our rituals, it's in our ceremonies, it's the way we speak, it's the way we treat and behave it, so that we would move through an ecocentric infancy to an ecocentric childhood to an ecocentric adolescence, rather than moving from an ecocentric infancy into an egocentric and anthropocentric childhood, and then a patho-adolescent adolescence. Right? Most children lose their ecocentrism by the time they're 6 these days. By the time they're 6, because of screens, because of sitting down and completing paper, because they're not in nature. They're not getting the ability to explore what brings them alive from ages 4 to 6, and they can often lose it here. Now, let's just say that it's dire and it's possible. There's huge movements occurring with regard to education here. even though many educators, environmentalists, scientists, earth activists aren't even eco-awakened. There's some shifts happening here. And a lot of it has to do with how we change our parenting, our religious practices, our entertainment, and our technology here. In an ecocentric culture, we trust that educare is the right way of educating and trusting that's what within the individual is what's wild, rather than educare, where we fill in the societal worldviews into the child and tell them what to do, right? Part of it has to do with play. Like play is an imitation. This comes from Paul Shepard, starting with simple fleeing and catching, going on to mimic joyfully the important animals, being them for a moment, and then not being them, feeling as this one must feel, and then that one, all tried on ourselves, right? And the child also sees the adults dancing the animal movements and does it as well. Music itself has been there all the time, from his mother's songs to the melodies of the birds and the howls of the worlds. The child already feels this mystery of kinship, likeness, but difference. So one of the things we've discovered at the Animas Valley Institute that's very important for retaining ecocentric consciousness is supporting wonder, supporting wonder. And in Bill Plotkin's book, Nature and the Human Soul, he identifies the nature-based tasks of development important for early childhood, which means access to opportunities to explore wild nature, which means other than human world, to explore our human body, including our senses, to explore imagination, especially dreams and other spontaneous imaginings, and also our emotions, experiencing and also understanding the relevance of these things. So it's really important then that children have these opportunities and that education is focused not just on understanding what the human culture is, but on understanding what nature is, because we are nature. So how do we support children in that? Well, partly it's return to the natural experiential practices that include the support of nature, embodiment, imagination, and emotional expression. Movements such as forest preschools, unschooling, rewilding, progressive nature-based schooling, and schools that are more like summer nature camps. Those are happening more and more in the world. And I suspect some of you on this kind of summit are also involved in that. Way to go. Another important thing here, and we hear this a little bit more in later school children and adolescents, is that as adults have realized what's here, they've often put the burden on saving the planet on the young people. That's not the thing to do. The most important thing is to support them belonging to Earth, belonging to Mother Nature. By then, they will act automatically in their wild instincts on how to do the right thing here. Okay, I'm going to move on here from early childhood. It's also true in adolescence. Peer-based nature exploration is really important. And important in adolescence is teaching more for authenticity and development, human development, rather than for a job, right? Drawing out what's already within the individual, supporting sensuality, sexuality, social authenticity, conflict resolution, further emotional intelligence, status assigning skills. These are what's important in adolescent education. And these are what most of us in adulthood are still working on because it wasn't supported in our adolescence here, right? The other thing that can really help here is supporting eco-awakening, which I'm going to talk about here. And there are many programs around the world now that are supporting adolescents, both because they see the consequences of the lack of these types of supports, but also because it's the right thing to do. I'll just name a couple here. Springhouse School in Virginia is one that's now taking its wild curriculum out and training others how to run school-based, nature-based programs informed by Bill Plotkin's soul-centric developmental wheel. And also Spirit Hollow. They have programs for young people in Vermont. And I'm sure that those things are also budding up. Certainly, I know of some in the United Kingdom, but other places around Europe and the rest of the world. Okay, so we can support the maintenance or the development or the deepening of ecocentric consciousness. There's something else for those of us who've lost this kind of consciousness that's powerful and possible as well. Here's what the geologian Thomas Berry said. And a lot of this movement has sprouted from his thinking, his experience, his wisdom, his elderhood. He wrote that a new revelatory experience is needed, an experience wherein human consciousness awakens to the grandeur and sacred quality of the earth processes. The awakening is our human participation in the dream of the earth, right? So to shift consciousness, especially these bigger shifts, not just gradually over time, we don't have 800,000 years to return to ecocentric consciousness. We have a couple generations if we're to survive. To shift worldview, one must expand consciousness, which often involves new experiences, not just reading, not just new information, not just listening to someone like me expound upon these things. It's a new experience. We often need to sever from our particular identity and all the other aspects of the self that reify who we think we are and what the world is. One maxim that I've come to believe over time, you can only be conscious of things which you have fully experienced, not just read about or learned about. So for me, expanding our individual consciousness is one of the most important things I can do in my lifetime, because it might actually make a collective ecological civilization possible. Right? So let's tackle that word eco-awakening here. All right, an awakening, one definition, it's a profound shift in identity, right? It could be like a developmental stage from early childhood to adolescence. That's kind of an awakening to one's emotions, to one's sensuality and sexuality. Sexual awakening, we've heard that term before. There's also transcendent awakenings, and I've had those in my meditative and centering prayer practices of becoming one with suchness or one with abiding love. Those are profound experiences, knowing that excuse me, is a possible way of living in the world, and to experience these states of consciousness and then to practice them further so they actually become stages of consciousness, that you are abiding love or suchness or emptiness, depending on that. And what you've heard about probably from some of the other speakers this week, especially those involved in the Animas Valley Institute, is an incendent awakening, going deep into our primal image and our essence. That's a soul descent. That's another kind of awakening. It's a downward awakening. What I'm going to be talking about for the next couple minutes here is an eco-awakening, where we move from our centrism in the self and the human to understanding that we're kinship here. And you heard me share my story of deepening into eco-awakening in that desert canyon, at the bottom of a desert canyon, when I had this mystical encounter with Grandmother Earth, who welcomed me back home. And it changed the course of my life, actually. Right? Bill Plotkin defines some of this eco-awakening from these terms: the first consciousness and embodied experience of their innate membership in the earth community. And then they recognize that this membership is their primary place of belonging in the world. It's not belonging to the humans. We struggle because we think that's the most important thing, is how do I fit into my family, or how do I fit into my peer group, or how do I fit into my collegial group or university group or my work environment. That's secondary. When we have this primary experience that we belong to Earth, those other experiences are not as important. It becomes greater that our affiliation with Earth is primary and everything else is secondary, right? Our inherent participation is in the more than human world, not just the human world, which means often that we might disaffiliate a little bit. We might pull out of some of the way we spend our time with families and sports teams and science and binge watching and other things like that, because there's a greater web of life, right? The vitality of the earth community, of which we now experience ourselves as a part, is our first concern, our first gladness, and it commands our greatest loyalty. It's not really effortful, it's effortless. It just spawns spontaneously from the center because we know we belong and we are acting for ourself, for all the others, for the other species, and for the future. Some aspects of this eco awakening are somatic, emotional, and spiritual, meaning mystical. And I think you might have heard that in my story where I broke down into tears and I changed my life, or it changed my life. It's not cognitive again. It's embodied, it's heart-rending, and a realization that we're natural, we're wild, and we're interconnected and related, and as magical as everything else is on the planet. All right, let me see if I might share some other things here. I'm working on a book project right now, which is the title, Pathways to Ecological Awakening. And one of the things I've been doing is I've been reading biographies and autobiographies of many people involved in, say, environmental movements or nature movements, who I suspected had mystical experiences in nature of this type. And I've not been disappointed, actually. I found them, and that'll be part of the main aspect of my book. And they include such people that you might know. John Muir, who's an American, Scottish American, who was responsible for all the national park system in the United States. He's had one. Aldo Leopold, who some of you might know about, land-based communities, had an experience after he killed a wolf, an eco-mystical encounter with a wolf who looked at him with these emerald eyes. Mary Oliver, for sure. Robinson Jeffers, an American poet. Daniel Quinn. Do some of you know him, the author of Ishmael? If you haven't read Ishmael or heard of Daniel Quinn, I'd encourage you to look at his website. He's passed now, but on his website, there's some amazing essays about animism, and his own eco-awakening experiences is in his biography, Providence. Julia Butterfly Hill, some of you might know her, who had an eco-awakening experience after a car accident and went in to sit up in Luna, that tree, the great redwood tree in Northern California for several years. Jane Goodall, who most of us know, painter Thomas Cole, and yes, even astronauts who've gone up into space and experienced this kind of overview effect have had an eco-awakening. So I've cataloged about 100 of these individuals. I'm going to share a couple of stories in a second here. Mystical experience, by the definition of the psychologist, one of the original psychologists interested in religious experience, William James, described it as ineffability. It defies expression, this mystical experience. It's hard to actually give it words. There's a noetic quality to it, an insight of the depths of truth, unplumbed by the discursive intellect. It's also transient often. These deep experiences tend to be transient, and often they're passive. Like, we might be seekers, but we can't make it happen. It just happens to us often here. And there's pathways to external mystical experience. And here's some of the pathways that I've discovered from my reading and my interviews of about 60 individuals who had experienced. Some of them include extended immersion in nature, like my experience. I was in that vast canyon system for 7 days and 1 day by myself. Nature-based rite paths, often hear these stories of eco-awakening. Psychedelics are a common source of eco-awakening. Immersion in nature-based cultures for greater than 14 days. Routine immersion in nature, nature connection programs. This Earthrise overview effect that happens when people are in the outer atmosphere looking back at this blue-green pearl, and they get a sense of how unique it is, and they do everything to want to protect it because we realize it's such a jewel. Often happen also with prayer, chanting, and dancing in nature, and even spontaneous experiences here. Some of the keys for eco-awakening is that there's an exposure to nature, and access to deep presence, emotion in the body, and access to the imagination. The same thing that I described was really important in early childhood, because we haven't had enough of it. When we can bring ourselves back to this kind of presence in our senses, in our bodies, in the wild earth, and open to our imagination, we might have this connection. Other thing that I've found helpful in the way I've guided it on the land is to guide ceremonies of grief, also of our disconnection and what is happening to the earth. All of those can be very powerful. So, to use psychedelic language, the setting is the natural space, safety, trust, senses, little distractions, and the intention and the prayer and the longing and the openness and the grief here. So we have a new program at the Animas Valley Institute, which is really designed for this, called Wild Passage. It'll be guided for the first time in a couple of weeks through Animas in South Africa. You may want to check it out. We'll be bringing it to Europe and North America and Australia in the next couple of years. It's a ceremonial beginning, 8 to 16 people, starts with a love letter to Earth. Nature wanders, praise wanders, crossing thresholds, speaking to nature as if it were sentient. Also includes dream work, a deep imaginal guide to something to help you connect to Earth. Storytelling around a fire, including the myth of one who destroyed the sacred grove. All kinds of things like that. Now, I also guide this through psychedelics in nature here. And I'm going to share one story here. All right, I'm going to just share the story of two people then. Let me see if I can pull it up here in the right way. Yeah, this is the story of Jane Goodall here. And if you know Jane Goodall, well, she turns 91 this week. So, and she's an amazing woman. She's obviously been an incredible advocate for Earth now, but she always wasn't that way. She was always interested in animals, interested in science. And I'm going to share her eco awakening experience, which she shares in her biography, which is about her spiritual journey. Right down below, the lake was still dark and angry with white flecks where the waves broke, and rain clouds remained black in the south. To the north, the sky was clear with only wisps of gray clouds still lingering. The scene was breathtaking in the beauty. In the soft sunlight, the chimpanzees' black coats were shot with coppery brown. The branches on which they sat were wet and dark as ebony, the young leaves a pale but brilliant green. And behind was the dramatic black cloth of the indigo sky where lightning flickered and distant thunder growled and rumbled. Lost in awe and the beauty around me, I must have slipped into a state of heightened awareness. It is a hard, impossible, really, ineffability, we might say. It is hard, impossible, really, to put into words the moment of truth that suddenly came upon them. Even the mystics are unable to describe their brief flashes of spiritual ecstasy. It seemed to me, as I struggled afterward to recall the experience, that self was utterly absent. I and the chimpanzees, the earth and the trees and the air seemed to merge, to become one with the spirit of life itself, to become one with the spirit power of life itself. The earth was filled with the feathered symphony, the evensong of birds. I heard new frequency in their music and also in the singing insects' voices, notes so high and sweet I was amazed. Never had I been so intensely aware of the shape, the color of the individual leaves, the varied patterns of the veins that made each one unique. Scents were clear as well, each identifiable, fermenting, overripe fruit, waterlogged earth, cold, wet bark, the damp odor of chimpanzee air, and yes, my own too. And the aromatic sense of young crushed leaves was almost overpowering. I sensed a new presence, then saw a bushbuck quietly browsing upwind, his spiraled horns gleaming and his chestnut coat dark with rain. After the chimpanzee left, she reports that she stayed in that place. It seemed a most sacred place, scribbling some notes, trying to describe what so briefly I had experienced. I had not been visited by the angels or other heavenly beings that characterize the visions of the great mystics of the saints. Yet for all that, I believe it truly was a mystical experience. How beautiful, huh? So this woman who had been living in the jungles of Gombe for several years already, in this one moment when she's by herself at a particular moment, after she's gone through challenging experiences with funding and with divorce and children, she has this mystical encounter, and that changed her life. You don't have to spend 40 years in a jungle to have this mystical experience. She spent several years there, then had this experience, and it's changed her devotion to the earth, less from describing about what she learned about chimpanzee communities and more into protecting all of life, more into protecting all of life. Here's another story. This one comes from one of our colleagues at the Animas Valley Institute, who's a trainee and also a wild mind guide. He's a friend of mine as well. His name is Dan, and he's in the book Journey of Soul Initiation. He described this when he turned 50 in a high altitude Rocky Mountain forest. I was sitting by a small stream on a starry moonlit night. I felt a strong sentinel-like presence from a stand of trees above the stream. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a tourist in nature. Excuse me. The forest was alive, and I was in communion with her. When I heard the trees clearly say with one voice, "Now you belong to us," I was shaken. At that moment, a great tectonic shift took place within me. I felt the sense of belonging to the whole cosmos, not just a church or denomination. I looked up in the sky full of stars and began to weep, overwhelmed by joy in the admission that I no longer felt the need to save the world. I just wanted to belong more fully to it. Right here again, you hear similar themes being present, the emotionality of it, the somatics of it, the vastness of it, the kinship of it, right? The beauty of the natural world. It's hard to describe these spiritual ecstasies. All right, now I want to share a little different one that doesn't come from primarily participation in the natural world. This comes from one of my friends and colleagues and someone I've mentored for a while. This comes from a physician. I'll just call him Dr. B. And this comes from my interview maybe a couple years ago, but about an experience he had when he was about 22 years of age, right? And it was actually when he was kind of finishing college, and he was actually at a Grateful Dead concert here. Right, so he's at this Grateful Dead cover band actually in the West Virginia. It's a natural setting. Before the concert, B, like several others around him, decided to take a psychedelic. He took a large dose of LSD and joined the concert where he danced and enjoyed the light show. He started wandering off into a field and began to feel lost, even though he could see the stage and other concert goers. He remembers a sense of following a voice or feeling that held the promise of leading him out and also leading him back to the concert. Eventually, he lay on the hill above the concert stage and beneath the clear, starry sky with the music, light show, and dancing below him. He had an encounter that was unsettling, an experience that both troubled him and changed him. He doesn't remember the entire journey on LSD as he recounted it to me, but this particular aspect of his experience was unforgettable. Everything around him coalesced into a singular being manifest as his complex emotional expression that subsumed and merged into him. He remembers a very fierce reprimand from Earth. It wasn't necessarily an image of Earth, but he sensed it was Earth. There was an undeniable gesture of disapproval by some immense arms and an emphasis of being reprimanded. His knowing that he was being rebuked for, in his words, not paying attention to Earth. On the first telling of this event to me, B shared that he felt ashamed by the tone of the gesture and the emotion and sensation it evoked in his body by the reprimand. The experience was somewhat resonant with some faint memories of interactions with his own human mother when he was young, those times when he felt admonished by her when he didn't know there were specific expectations of him. On further discussion and conversation, B reports that he felt awe as well as dread at the power of the earth and her reprimand. This censure led to an astonishing and powerful imaginal experience. His consciousness transitioned to being both in the birth pangs of labor and simultaneously the darkness and constrictions of being born. In telling the story of this journey, it's clear that the dual process of birthing and being birthed could not be disentangled psychically. He remembers the agony of the contractions both as birther and as the one being born. When he finally emerged from this process, he found himself in the light, relieved that he has completed the birthing of himself, and relieved that he has birthed another newly born self that can pay attention to Earth. In the minutes, hours, and days after the psychedelic journey concluded, B reported that he was freaked out by that journey, as it was almost too weird and too powerful. He stayed away from psychedelics for many years after that experience. When I asked how this experience changed the way he perceived and participated in the world, he shared that he went on to pursue and attain a minor in environmental education. He joined ecological activist groups. His final independent study was studying in investigating aspects of environmental activism in New York City. He also stopped eating animals. Clearly, this mystical experience shifted the way in which Ben paid attention to Earth and began to hold Earth in mind as he continued his education, how he spent his time, and what he ate. His experience, like so many others who have taken LSD or psilocybin, qualifies as a deep mystical experience. The original scientific survey describing mystical experiences was not validated validated until recently. A mystical experience often has a sense of internal unity, external unity, a noetic quality, and a sacredness. Other things cataloged by the questionnaire include a profoundly positive mood, transcendence of space and time, and ineffability. In his telling of the journey, we hear the following qualities: the loss of a usual sense of time, an experience of amazements, a sense that the experience cannot be described adequately in words, a gain of insightful knowledge experienced at a deeply intuitive level, his loss of space and time, and an encounter with an ultimate reality in the sense of being able to know and see what is really real at some point during the journey. The feeling you cannot do justice to the experience or by describing it in words, etc., etc. Right? Notably absent from his journey was a sense of joy or unity with ultimate reality or ecstasy or spiritual height. Rather, it was somewhat terrifying. Now, this qualifies obviously as a spiritual mystical experience, but it also qualifies as a mystical eco-awakening experience, as well as an experience of the numinous, right? And I'm just going to bring in Rudolf Otto here, a German theologian, who described the numinous in his book, The Idea of the Holy. And he describes the sacred, the numinous, as a non-rational, non-sensory experience or feeling whose primary and immediate object is outside the self, derived from the phrase numen, which means deity or spirit. He uses the phrase mysterium tremendum at fascinans, a mystery that is once terrifying and fascinating, wholly other. We hear this in his experience, but we also hear it as gracious. He's newborn, or what we might call a rebirth, a metanoia, right? So these experiences are life-changing. You can probably hear it in that one. That obviously changed this young man in the course of his life. And my sense is this is where a lot of us in our facilitation work can go. That tourism shouldn't actually be tourism anymore. What if we could create tourism that actually eco-awakening tourism? That psychedelics isn't necessarily focused on healing. It's about awakening our deep connection to Earth. And that the former and now currently empty churches, mosques, and synagogues might focus on deep connection to Earth, something like that. So it's an important aspect of our human development here. All right, so we're at 7:30 right now, my time.
Yes, there are 15
Wonder
more.
if we might open for questions a little bit, and then I want to bring us into an experience, if I might. Is that all right, Sandra?
Yes, yeah, 15 more minutes, something like that,
15.
15, 20.
Yeah, great. Any questions by what I've said or clarifications? Right. Well, maybe I can just bring us into an experience for a couple minutes here. Is that okay?
Um, can I ask one thing before?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned not to use psychedelic experience as healing, but awakening, ecocentric awakening
Oh, not
experience.
the focus of it. Sorry. I
Oh,
meant to say not the focus of just healing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they're
So,
important for healing. I also do that work, but they're also important for not just focusing on our human wounds. They can be used for obviously connecting us to vaster consciousness, including Earth consciousness and animated cosmos. So I'm sorry, I didn't
and
mean to
yeah,
interrupt.
no, it's fine. I'm curious, how do you practically invite it? What's the practical way how you invite it?
Well, one possibility is to do it outside or what we call nature, rather just in a clinical environment. So that's some of the things I've been doing for several years, and I'll be encouraging and training others to do that in the next couple decades, hopefully. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I'll just note name here. Something's happening in that space, more and more becoming aware of this kind of possibility. Many of the founders or the Renaissance or the original westernized people who experienced psychedelics, they all took them in nature, and many of them had these experiences. It's because of the criminalization of these substances that they've had to kind of go into the lab and into science and into medicine, and to be focused on healing before we can actually make them legal again. But their power is not just in human healing in a center, it's also in awakening the senses and awakening this deep connection to Earth. And it's interesting also that most indigenous peoples find this a bit ironic. Many of the indigenous peoples who continue to use their versions or their plants or mushrooms or ayahuasca, like they see this happen for those from Western society, but it's not something they've ever experienced because they've never lost it. They've never lost it. Yeah, thanks for the question here. Is there another question, or might we move into a bit of an experience here? I invite you just to rest back again on that place where you were, breathing in and breathing out. Just right where you are right now in your chair, standing, the carpet, if you're outside, just breathing in and breathing out. When you breathe out any tension. Breathing in, which, let me remind you, you're not just breathing in air, you're breathing in sky, wherever you are, whatever mountain range, watershed, breathing in the sky and breathing back to sky. Feeling the body on the held by the mother. I invite you to allow, like, there's a seed within you, whether it's in your chest, your heart, your yoni, or your spine. Allow the seed of you to realize it's moistened and to send out a tendril down out of your body into the body of Earth. Down, working its way through the floorboards and out the door, into the sand and the gravel, down into Earth. That seed, that rootlet, that tendril going down into Earth, finding its way through the various mycelial networks, various cracks in the rock, not just in any Earth, but the Earth where you are, going down and down into Earth. Might even encounter nutrients or water. You might invite that back up into your own body. Roots going down into Earth. Nutrients and water coming up. Meanwhile, you're breathing in the sky. Now you're actually a conversation between the Earth and the sky. You're so vast. I might invite you now to travel to a place. It might be a place different than the other place I had you start, but a place where you feel fully alive. Everything appears to be conscious and sentient and speaking to each other. Whatever that means, just invite you in your imagination to travel to a place like that. When you arrive in a place like that, just to take it in with all of your senses. The aroma or the stench, the smell, the humidity on your skin, or the breeze, or the lack thereof. The quality of the sunlight or the moonlight, the starlight, or the reflections off the water. The sounds of the beam. Taste in your mouth. Also taking in with your own soft imaginal vision the landforms of rock, the water forms of waterfall or pond, brook, ocean, and the plant and mushroom forms, trees, mosses, lichens, grasses, insects that might be there, flying ones, just taking it all in, might be in the waters as well, and noticing what it feels like to be there. The vibe of the place, whether you recognize it or not. It could be a place from childhood or just here in your imagination or a place you've longed to go. Just being with that, it's more about being there than understanding or knowing what it is. If you feel fully there, I might just invite you to call out in your own way. Guide to my deep ecological awakening, might you come to me. You're longing to meet an aspect that might guide you deeper into the dream of the earth. Calling out in your way, guide to my deep eco-awakening, might you come to me now. Just be with whatever comes here. Just kind of open. Whatever comes there, just invite you to take it in with your senses as well. For some of you, it might already be there. For some, it might still be dark. Just be with that. It might be a pinpoint of light. Just be with that. For others, a creature might have come here, being an animal. Just kind of witness what's there. Whether it has feathers or fangs, feet, or eyes, tails, whether it's watching you. Curious about what's coming to you. Actually, now you might, if something has come to you, you might speak out loud to it about your longing to feel that kinship with all species, with all earth. If you haven't met an animal guide being yet, you might continue to feel your longing to meet one. might be delighted by what's happening, so you might feel frustrated. Just be with what is, just be open to this possibility. Just gonna ask you to, for those of you whose screens are on, just raise your hand if you've met a bee, an animal guide, any. I just invite you to keep feeling your longing to meet this one. Call out in your own way. Tied to my ecological awakening, my ecological consciousness, my original participation. Come to me today. Let it happen. I suspect that our time is coming to an end shortly here. For whatever has come to you, I just invite you to be with that today. You might take some notes if you have a little journal there of what's come to you. And sometime later today or tomorrow, you might go for a walk somewhere, a place that's wild or semi-wild. You might step across a threshold filled with longing to feel your greater participation in the earth. You might bring along this one that's come to you. Or if nothing's come to you, you might hold this intention tonight when you fall asleep, that longing to kind of act from the center of the earth, the center of consciousness. See what comes in your dream tonight. To wander with or as that one tomorrow, speaking out loud to the ones that you find in the wild or semi-wild, or even the backyard. More like remembering who you've always been. It's more like remembering the way you were as a child. It's more like deepening even the way you participate with your family. Seems appropriate now. Maybe I turn it back to you, Sandra. Thank you for holding space and creating this opportunity for all of us, for inviting me. It's been my honor to be here.
Thank you. I still am flowing with the music. Okay. Thank you, dear one. Yeah. Wow. What a spectacular articulation of so many years of experience and reading and feeling deeply the world from within. We are so grateful that you are in the process of writing a book. It would have been completely not normal for you not to do that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for beautifying and rewilding the world through your poetics. Thank you. And for the rest of us, circle. Perhaps you can even take some minutes in this break to be with the creature that found you in the magic of your imagination, in the splendors of your darkness. You can spend some time journaling.